Welcome back to the Lore and Valor podcast. I am joined once again by Mike Massa, veteran frogman and author of science fiction and fantasy extraordinaire, and award-winning independent filmmaker Sam Platiski. Thanks so much for joining us, guys.
Thank you.
Sam, I should note, is fresh off the heels of Gen Con, and I am both so excited and so envious of him in that regard because that is a convention I've wanted to go to for many years. So congratulations, Sam. I know you didn't get any awards at the Gen Con Film Festival, but I also know you probably had a great time attending. And you came home to an award, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. We won an award a couple weeks ago, and it just was mailed to us. It was in the mail when we got home, so that was cool.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. So, like Jack Carr, we're going to be a little guilty of product placement. I should note that we are not sponsored, but I did manage to secure a bottle of Hooten Young American whiskey, which I'm ecstatic to report. This is the 12-year aged American whiskey they have. I'm ecstatic to report is actually delicious. So I have been consuming a little bit of it.
It would have been cool if you passed the bottle to the side of the screen, and then Mike had his own bottle that he could pull to the side and then put it down to the screen to me. That would have been cool.
We will manage that for the live stream. So
Yes.
We all have to have the same. We'll have to have the same bottle, or we'll
yeah.
So
absolutely.
you got to ship us. You have to go buy 2 bottles of that and send one to Sam, one to me.
Yeah, we'll have to drink half of it, then ship it to you, right? That's the way it works. Yeah. So a real quick note about Hooten Young whiskey is that it was founded by Norman Hoot and Tim Young. Norman Hoot will be familiar to probably anyone watching this YouTube or listening to this podcast because Norman Hoot was ably portrayed by Eric Bana in Black Hawk Down. That is the Delta Force NCO of "This Here's My Safety, Sir" fame from the movie Black Hawk Down. So that is that guy who founded this American whiskey distillery. And confession, guys, I expected to taste it and think, oh, this is okay, this is whiskey. It's actually really good. I'd put it in a similar class to Buffalo Trace. So flagrant product placement. We are not sponsored. I am not taking any money from Hooten Young, but I do recommend it for you bourbon lovers out there.
And we will take bourbon.
we will take, yeah, very much. So we are here today to talk to you after that digression about Terminal List episodes 5 and 6. We're going to speed up the pace a little bit here as we start to talk about it. So this episode opens up with a set piece in Iraq. And I've watched it twice now, and I still give it a lot of credit for matching my memory of being on the ground in Iraq in terms of what it looks like and what it feels like in terms of the urban environment, the sand, the heat. But there are a few things that immediately pop out right at you when you're watching it. If you on the second watch through. So for me, it struck to me that you have this SEAL team running through Najaf in a van, which may be feasible, but I have to ask why they're not in an American up-armored Humvee or something like that. And also, all 4 of them have rifles. Even a standard U.S. Army rifle team would have a light machine gun, an M249, and a grenade launcher or 3, M203 on their rifles. Mike, you've operated as a SEAL. What about you? What about this scene struck you as good? What about it struck you as maybe they could have done this better?
I think they did a decent job of mocking up your basic everyday Mark 1 Mod 0 Najaf side street. But if you accept that they were doing a different job and their primary job wasn't as a QRF and they just happened to be there, then I guess you could come up with a reason for why they were armed and equipped the way they were. But if you were running a QRF, you would have up-armored and up-gunned vehicles with lots of belt-fed pintle-mounted weapons, as well as belted personal weapons, and you'd be going in heavy because you're pushing into somewhere where bad things are happening. If you accept that this team was just happened to be there and he felt strong enough that he was going to make the op, that's great. I wasn't nearly as distracted by that as subsequent details, like the remarkably intact condition of the helicopter, the absence of fire, the relatively unmussed physical appearance of the survivor. And I really enjoyed the humor of one of the guys in the back seat of the truck trying to keep from squeezing one out accidentally. Did an op like that, and it went horribly awry. So that made me laugh because I was remembering my own experiences with someone who was crowning as we were rushing to the sound of guns. It was pretty hysterical.
Oh my God!
I messaged Justin after I watched that episode. I was like, "Hey man, you ever have to shit in the middle of a mission or something?" Because I never thought of that. It just never like crossed my mind. But I was like, "That's very real. That feels real."
And what did I tell you, Sam? I said absolutely. I remember holding on to in Afghanistan. I remember holding on to the back of an MRAP. So MRAPs are V-shaped, like the bottom is V-shaped to try to address mines basically, or IEDs. And we borrowed a lot of designs from South Africa, amongst other places. And I remember holding onto the bumper and letting one loose in the middle of operations because it was like, there's no way to avoid this. Yeah.
If you work long enough in uniform, you're always going to have multiple really good bathroom stories. I won't go into detail, but my personal favorite was after one op, having, in a semi-serious but also funny way, having to document the procedure for safely doing a number 2 underwater, rigged up with closed circuit gear with live explosives and demo under an adversary ship, and do so quietly in zero visibility without tangling all your shit up. So tangling your equipment up, sorry. But ribbit races are a thing, and that's an Iraq war sort of phenomenon, where the ribbit races, where you drink a case of ribbits, which is a caffeine energy drink issued to the troops, and you would have 2 guys would square off over a case of ribbits to see how many you could drink in an hour or so. And there's a great story about a guy that went on a QRF after having drunk about a case of ribbits, and 15 minutes or 20 minutes into the op, he had and he was a gunner in the top of an MRAP. And if you can find that account on the internet, it is hilarious. It's so funny. It inspired some of my writing in John Ringo's universe, because ribbits it's crazy.
Yeah, I can totally believe that. So what's funny is I actually stayed fairly clear of both Wild Tiger, which was really popular in Iraq, and ribbits in general. When I was a platoon leader and a fire support officer, anything that was on the line, I tried to stay clear of it. I drank a lot of water, tried to, stay more or less clean. When I was a staff officer, I was basically addicted to citrus ribbits. At that point, like I was like operating on pure caffeine and hatred, is what kept me going as a staff officer. And it was responsible for a lot of dental work. I will say, not that I didn't brush my teeth, but just consuming that much sugar was not good for the teeth. But yeah, no, like the ribbits did fuel a large part of the war. So yeah, no, you're right, Sam. That is a good detail to include, that we have all this aspirational stuff and this cool commando action. These people are still just human, like
everybody poops, man. Everybody poops.
And in a series that's so dark and so gritty and vengeance and blood and squelchy sounds as you rip the intestines out of your adversary for the bad things he did, that was a remarkably lighthearted moment that was needed and frankly overdue.
Yeah. And we start to get that in these last few episodes. We get some lighter-hearted, more human moments throughout the thing that we get either in flashbacks or in interactions with Ben and Reese as we go on. One of the things that stood out to me is that with Horn's character and Tedesco being the bald-headed New Bellum CEO who kind of fell in under Horn's wing, we have like a severe like we covered in the last episode how easy it is to hate Horn, and nothing's going to change about that. We kind of talked, we jumped ahead a little bit because rewatching it, I realized it's actually in this episode that he talks to the FBI agent and the U.S. Marshal, and it comes out that he has the faux Navy SEAL tattoos and everything as a civilian, which, again, bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it plays out for him. And that in this episode, we see how hard he underestimates and misunderstands Tedesco and his motivations and what makes him tick.
Who's the scientist, the little mousy scientist guy?
Yeah, and it's just this ludicrous overconfidence on Horn's part that because I am dominant, Tedesco will do what I want him to do until he's faced with the fact that he isn't, and they end up with a catastrophe.
Yeah, the archetype that Horn portrays is well executed, and the writers and the actor did a good job of crafting this character whom you hate, and everything he does simply reinforces that feeling, which kind of makes the viewer feel good. I hate him, and I'm right for hating him, and I'm really hoping he gets his. So it was ably done, and I appreciated that. And for the people in the back who had the cheap seats and couldn't quite get what the point was, that interaction between the Phoebe and the Marshal and Horn, she calls out explicitly, "Hey, look, so-and-so, you oughtn't be wearing that." And I'm pretty sure you know it, and I know it, and everybody who matters knows it. And that tells me more about you than you think it does. And that was really well done.
Yeah. Yeah. Scene, like, because like there's inside the military, there are kind of concentric circles of cool, so to speak. Like if you're an astronaut, you're in the tightest circle. Like it's that simple. You're like, okay, you're an astronaut. And then it gets fuzzier, and it's not, it's not encoded by any means, but like guys like Mike or special operations, they went through a harder selection course than most of us, and they get a little more street cred, and deservedly so. But one of the things that gets you labeled as a douche so quickly is claiming things you don't have a right to. Like, and that like, I'm wondering if that was communicated adequately to someone who doesn't have a military background.
Yeah, what do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I that didn't like land with me as much as just the fact that he's just a dick. He's a douche. He's easy to hate. He's almost too much of a villain. And I say that like about most of the people in the show who are villains. They're a little too easy to hate. Maybe one of the villains, maybe two of the villains aren't, but and they're a little more sympathetic. But everybody else, you're like, when Reese kills them, it's like, good, fuck those guys. This is good, But like the military stuff, like it didn't really land with me as much, obviously, as a civilian. But yeah, I mean, and Horn, gets what's coming to him. As we get to that.
And Mike, correct me, I want your opinion on this too. But for me, like, there's nothing, I don't hold like a quartermaster officer or anybody who was in a support branch in the military. I don't hold them in contempt. I really don't. And likewise, I don't think special operators hold the rest of the military in contempt. It's just when you try to portray yourself as something you're not, that's what generates contempt.
So I'll tell you, the shorter the interval between event A and your successful winning of your spurs, however you choose to define that, passing SAT and getting your trident, the shorter that interval, the more likely you are to respond perhaps less positively to that kind of interaction. I had my own moment where I had just gotten my trident, and I decided to go to what was then the legendary Naval Air Station Miramar Wednesday Officers Club night, where all the ladies show up and all the pilots are there.
Let me break in. Miramar is where Top Gun used to be, the Naval Fighter Weapons School. It's now in Fallon.
The scene in the first Top Gun, where they sing "You Never Close Your Eyes."
Lost that love and feeling. Go ahead.
So that bar is a real place, or used to be a real place. And every Wednesday night, it was ladies' night. Ladies get in free and drink effectively free. So there were a lot of ladies there. And 22-year-old Mike Massa went there with a brand new Trident. And I ran into a pilot who was wearing a Trident. And I went, well, that's peculiar. Who were you? And so you asked.
That's an unusual career path, to say the least.
Yeah, how'd you do that? And he immediately got really wiggly and squiggly and uncomfortable and departed the conversation. So I followed him in the head and took his Trident away. So I'm looking back, I'm not particularly proud of that. But at the time, I was super, super smug and self-righteous about it because 22 years old, just got his Trident, yada, yada, yada. So the younger and stupider you are, the more you're full of that bullshit. Guys that have, and at that point, I never even deployed.
Yeah.
Directly, you're exposed to more serious business in life. That becomes a lot less important. And the first time you have, pick the combat service support function, whether it's logistics or medical or any damn person that helps you when you need it, you're like, that's actually goddamn handy. I'm sure glad we have those people. So that arrogance is rapidly tempered and bleached out of you. But a brand new frogman, oh God, ego. There's not enough room in my house to house that ego that I had.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And like, I completely agree. It's like you don't operate long before you realize it's all one big machine, and remove any cog and it ceases to function. And with some exceptions, there are some things that are probably superfluous.
And within, I want to briefly comment on your theory or your metaphor of the concentric circles of cool, how astronauts are in the middle. I would argue that if you're a SEAL, astronaut, Harvard-trained surgeon, you might be actually the pixel in the middle of the concentric circle of cool. Like
looking at you, Kim.
Yeah, looking at Commander Kim, who, by the way, is also getting his wings. I don't know if we mentioned that. He's about to finish, or maybe by this point has finished the NASA pilot training to be a pilot.
So I'll put a link. Yeah, I'll put a link to that guy in the comments. But Sam, just for your fundamental information, is it Johnny Kim? Is his name?
Yeah, John Kim.
John Kim. He is no shit, and correct me if I misstate this, Mike. He is a Navy SEAL, Silver Star recipient, which Silver Star is the third highest award for valor. Silver Star recipient, Harvard educated, doctor, lawyer, astronaut. Like all at the same time. And I'm like, good Lord. Save some for the rest of us, buddy.
I don't think he actually passed the bar though. I think he just got the pre-law. Did he get the law degree, or he has a medical degree and he's a doctor? I know that.
Yeah, it's been a while since I looked. I just saw an article on him a few months ago, and I was like, wow. I bet that guy has no time to watch Netflix.
I'm guessing he doesn't find himself playing a lot of video games. Yeah.
So yeah, there are dudes like that who make basically everyone feel like they're slacking. So anyway, all that to say, like, be proud of what you are. Don't try to claim what you're not. Is the bottom line, I would say, is the good is the takeaway from that. And also
don't be like Horn.
Yeah, don't be a sociopathic douche. On top of that, would be the other part of that.
But in order to keep this short, I mean that scene does what it needs to do. It explains why it's Katie, right? The pilot.
Mm-hmm.
Liz. Why she's part
Liz
of
is the pilot.
Sorry, Liz. Why she's the pilot. And that's probably one of the three most important parts of the episode. The other one, of course, being the thing we talked about, where we finally we get the good guy and up to that point, who I thought was the main bad guy.
Yes, me too.
Face to face.
Yeah. So that was a surprise at the end of the episode. That was a big surprise. I was like, oh, they just did it, and there's like 3 more episodes at this point. It's like that. Yeah, I did because they set him up. They set Horn up to be like the big bad.
Yeah.
As like as wannabe as he was. So I was surprised by that a lot. Yeah.
It's the power of characterization, because I will say, as a reader of the book, I understood where they were going. But yeah, no, I could totally understand if you just came into it blind. It's like, yeah, Horn's the big bad. As soon as he's dead, Reese can chill. Maybe he can go get that brain tumor treated. We'll see. Uh, but yeah, as we find out, it's not the case. I will say, as the having been on the receiving end of an EFP in my life for real, and having lost comrades to it, this is probably arguably the most egregious technical and tactical error or ask, depending on how you want to look at it, of the series, when Reese tells Liz Riley an EFP is incredibly precise.
Yeah.
An EFP is directed.
Yeah.
It's not a generalized blast. That's true. You're making a projectile, but it is not precise. Like that was hot garbage.
Well, and the montage of his device construction was hilarious. I guess
I'm going to give them a pass on that one because they're probably trying to obfuscate that to a large degree of like, oh, we're not showing people how to make an IED. Like, I get that, but like the fact that they describe the characteristics so fictional.
It reminded me of that scene from the Steven Seagal movie where he's taking a 5-inch 54 caliber shell, cutting it open, heating it up over a heating element to liquefy the plasticized explosive and pouring and making like, oh my God.
What was that? Was that in Marked for Death? Which movie was that in? Was that in Mark? Go ahead.
That was the one where he goes on board Wisconsin, and he's I'm just a cook.
Under Siege.
Oh, Under Siege.
Yeah.
It's one of the better ones that he did, though. Not saying much, but it's one of the better ones.
Well, yeah. What you said, yes, it was arguably his best film. Is the one where he dies in the first 3 minutes, flying from climbing the umbilical from a stealth bomber into a
executive decision. Yeah, executive action or executive decision. Yeah,
executive
the one with Kurt Russell.
I don't remember it.
Kurt Russell's the hero.
Yeah. Under Siege is hilarious because Tommy Lee Jones and Gary Busey are the bad guys. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't matter how inaccurate militarily that movie is, it's still amazing.
Yeah.
Do I look like I need a psychological evaluation?
Why, yes, actually. You do.
What do you guys think of the Reese's strategy for going after Horn in public? Because that didn't ring true to me at all. I feel like he's got to be better than that. Yeah.
Right? Go ahead, Mike. I'll let you lead off, and then I'll comment on it.
I mean, why would you go after the guy? Oh, so first off, I can't think of a reason why that would be the best way to do it, other than if you accept the premise that you can have a precise, explosively formed projectile IED, actually in essence a VBIED, and that you can kill the bad guy and everybody around him and get away and not have a lot of civilian casualties. If you accept all those premises, then maybe, but it's not consistent with his preference to do things personally and make sure the bad guy that dies understands why they're dying. So to me, that's not consistent, but in the end, it works out because, of course, the hit goes wrong and he has to climb out, and there's the shootout with all kinds of, flashy gun action that the audience, the movie makers think the audiences demand. And then, of course, the very satisfying, you get the worm turns and you have Horn begging for his life and getting zapped twice in the chest and once in the head, a proper canoe, and away goes our hero. And I'm like, wow, I guess we need something else to do because there's 3 more episodes to go, to your point, Sam.
Yeah. Mike, I completely agree with you that it's, on one hand, as any sort of a tactician, it does trip your bullshit meter pretty quick. But I will say this does have one of my favorite lines in the whole show, is when one of the private military contractors who's part of his security looks at him, throws the vest on him, and says, "Listen up, you fucking fanboy, time to nut up." I was like, okay. Like, I'm really sad that this guy is probably going to die because Reese is going to shoot him, because that was pretty awesome.
Yeah. I bet you anything, the guy that was given those lines used to be somewhere in the military and was just so delighted he got to say that.
Yeah, and then Reese just canoes him, which this is part of the problem, is that, you know, the whole plan for the EFP revolves around the fact that Reese needs to take him alive, right? That he's going to use this EFP as a distraction and take him alive because he needs to question him. But earlier in the episode, I don't want to get into too many details because we are trying to, you know, keep these a little more efficient in terms of time. But he gets the information he thinks he needs, so he no longer needs Horn alive, so he just executes him. And if that's the case, there are so many more efficient ways to execute him without risking anyone else.
Yeah.
You know, because that's the bottom line, is like, I don't think most of the viewers who are willing to watch The Terminal List begrudge Reese killing the people who murdered his family and enabled the murder of his family. But most of us are like, hey, bro, you don't get to kill innocent people while you're doing it. You know, like that it's like, it's okay that you're trying to kill Horn and Agnon and Holder and all these other people who were involved. You know, get down with your bad self. But, you know, the fact that you're using an IED on the streets of San Francisco, not as justified when you could just stand off 500, 600, 800 meters with a rifle and canoe the guy's head.
On the other hand, consider the target demographic for The Terminal List, right? How many of them are really going to be bummed that something blows up in San Francisco? I mean, really.
Well, I wasn't trying to make this political, Michael.
No, in a very serious way, this is an example where Amazon bought a show whose executive producer and producers, who are the money men or money women, and the directors of the episodes perfectly understood their target audience. In the book, is that a similar scene? Is there an explosion in San Francisco? Are they being true to the book?
If I remember correctly, it's in New York. But it has been a minute since I didn't read in Dead Tree version. I listened on Audible. And a lot of the stuff I will say again, and I said this last episode, and I'll say it again this episode, a lot of the stuff in the book maybe feels more authentic, but is less satisfying dramatically. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So I do think it was more of a, he employs the IED against Hartley's husband, I think, not against Horn. In the book. In the book, Horn survives till the climax.
I mean, look, I've been a big city dweller, exclusively a big city dweller as far as where I was domiciled my entire life. You know, London, New York, Frankfurt, LA, San Diego, Washington, D.C., all big cities. But there is a very real, and I think Johnny Ringo did a great job of it in his Live Free or Die series, when the big bads are threatening to blow up a city. If the country dweller doesn't give them what they want, he goes, "Don't you get it? I don't care. Blow up the cities. Not important to me. You're threatening the wrong guy with the wrong thing. If anything, you're going to make me laugh." Yeah. And that, whether intentional or not, probably drove a lack of, okay, so he blew up some bad guys in the city. All right, well, you know, too bad. Sucks to be them. Go live in San Francisco. Next scene, please. So I don't think that would have a lot of impact in it. To a discerning moralist, which I think you are, Justin, and on my good days I pretend to be, I have a problem adopting the actions of our enemies and adversaries that would blow up civilians or threaten urban environments, and doing that and still being the good guy in my head. But I guess if you're twisted enough with a tumor and you have that loss, you just don't care. And it does neatly set up the most important thing that happens in the next episode, which is the whole pursuit, because now he's a domestic terrorist. Righteous or not, you now have every qualified law enforcement officer is going to be deputized to find you, and they're not going to try to arrest you.
Yeah,
Well,
I agree,
very
Mike.
hard.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. And I'm like, to be clear, I live in Houston, so I'm also a dazzling urbanite, to quote Mel Brooks from Blazing Saddles. But yeah, no, I completely agree that at that point. So when you read the book, like, and I hesitate to be too critical of Jack Carr because I actually like I enjoyed the book a lot. And I think he's a positive force in both literature and the veteran community. So I hesitate to be, you know, like I'm doing a lot of hedging my bets here. So forgive me. I tend to be willing to criticize movies and TV shows much more than I'm willing to criticize fellow novelists. Because it either comes across as hitting at my peers or people who are trying to climb the ladder behind me, or punching up, but it's because of sour grapes because I'm not that successful. And I don't mean it in either way. But I will say that what I got from both the book and the series is it's trying to push the perception of Reese to the edge, to see like how much will you accept of what Reese does before he's no longer the hero. It kind of exceeds my ability to sympathize when he uses an EFP in San Francisco because I understand the employment of those. I understand them intimately, both from having received one and from having countered them and having hunted down IED cells in Iraq. That I'm like, no, this is not the right tool tactically for the job that you're trying to do. Even if you like, I get what you're trying to do and I understand the message you're trying to convey, but I don't really approve of it per se. That being said, it didn't ruin my enjoyment of the episode or the book, but I am willing to call it a flaw in the story for me.
Sure. But it does neatly set up all of the action in the very next episode.
Yeah.
Which we I think we all agreed was not a really necessary episode to have. So if you didn't set it up, we wouldn't need it, and then we could just move on to episode 7. Yeah. I mean, like we talked about compared him to Punisher before, wife and kids dead. And the Punisher, is a fucking mass murderer. He's not a good guy, but I don't think he would wage war in daylight in a public city like that. And if like your guy is like less heroic than the Punisher, I start to lose a little bit of my my sympathy for the guy.
Yeah. So, Mike, have you ever read Punisher comic books or seen the Punisher series or Daredevil on Netflix, Mike? I'm just curious.
I have to walk over to my shelf and get down my my collection. But yes, I'm very familiar with Frank Castle.
Okay, awesome. So that we can all talk about this on equal footing. So, Sam, what I'm going to say is that in Daredevil season 2 of Netflix, in my opinion, Frank Castle won that argument with Matt Murdock. So keeping that in mind, that's my fundamental stance. When it comes to Terminal List, I agree with you. That I'm like, no. Frank Castle takes great care in the comics and for the most part in the Netflix series to avoid harming non-combatants. So this is really morally complex, but you accept collateral damage in war because the results of not accepting collateral damage are so much worse. That's the idea. In very brief terms and sounding very glib about a great tragedy, so I'm sorry if this upsets anyone, you nuke Hiroshima and Nagasaki so you don't lose 1 million Americans invading Japan and 2 million Japanese invading Japan.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of calculus you're doing in war. If you're just seeking retribution for its own sake, then in my opinion, my moral opinion, not even one innocent life is justified if it's just retribution. And there are no strategic implications. You're not trying to prevent further harm. If you're just James Reese and you want to kill the people who killed your family, you don't get to kill anybody who's innocent.
So it's super rare to have in any real life engagement things that are so perfectly cut and dried and understood pre-bellum. In a work of fiction, we can create that for the purposes of examining a character's actions. And I don't want to dwell too long on the VBID. While I find, I had friends get blown up by them. I never got hit by one, thank goodness. But they are a very, very effective weapon.
Yeah.
And there's a long history of IEDs and VBIDs being used to great effect, including by sides that were ultimately successful in their conflict and thereafter draped in the moral fabric of success, if you will. Whether those colors are color fast and put them through the wash or not, time will tell. But and I think I might be spending too long on this, but yes, it does introduce a useful note of ambiguity if one were needed. But all the errors as far as the tactical accuracy of the show up to this point become as nothing with the extraordinary decisions made in the script of episode 7, which is the chase through the national park. Which, if it's the south, it's Satanic Boulders, and if it's north,
yeah. Just to be clear, Mike, episode 6.
Sorry, correction, episode 6.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. I want to back up to a positive, do like a compliment sandwich, where I'm going to talk about the things I liked, and then we're going to bitch about the things we hated, and then we're going to talk about something we liked. So I actually really like the flashback with James Reese and his in-laws. There's a couple of reasons I like it. This is particular to me. Sam, I don't know if you noticed this because I think you've watched this show as well as I have. Lauren Reese's father is Alice's father from The Magicians.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically plays the same character. Like the hapless, kind of weak, kind of hapless non-factor. But that Lauren's mom, when James Reese comes to them and says, people are going to say things about me, I would never hurt my wife and children. No one else is going to take care of this. I'm going to. And I appreciate that Lauren's mom says, you do what you got to do. I'm like, yeah, no. If somebody killed my daughter and my granddaughter, fucking get it. Like that's where I'm at too. So I appreciated that scene. And I appreciate there's one little note I want to get into. It's a minor detail, but when there's in the police chase and the cop tries to spin him out and Reese knows how to drive against that. Okay, cool. Like I like that little detail, stuff like that in there. But then you get into the chase through the woodlands in, I don't know if it's supposed to be Yosemite or where they are. And oh my God.
It's not Yosemite because they're on the coast because he does a water extract.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah, you're right. It actually looks not entirely dissimilar from the terrain I grew up in high school in Northern California, which I guess is where he's supposed to be. So good job on that. But I'll go ahead and start off. You have the FBI hostage rescue team coming in to track him down, which I'm not even sure that's the right unit from federal law enforcement that would get detailed for that, but we'll go with it for now.
It probably isn't the HRT. It's probably a regional HRT, and there is one in San Francisco. So
yeah.
that's I won't say impossible. I wouldn't even call it plausible, but sorry, keep going.
But so you're going through these wide open spaces, and I'm not like one of the things I make very clear is I consider myself the average Joes of combat vets. Like I was an artillery officer. I have experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, but I was never anything special. I'm not a ranger or special forces or anything like that, but I have been trained. And I assume their people they're portraying have been trained as well. And when I see them in wide open terrain, rammed up each other's ass, and moving along natural lines of drift, they're in a line basically, like, oh, they're spread out a little, but basically they're in a line moving down a creek bed, you know, and I'm like, I'm sorry, what? You know, like the sergeants who trained me as a college cadet would have been reaming me for hours for moving in that formation, and you guys are supposed to be elite. Yeah, I'm done at this point. Like you actually, I've been forgiving the show a lot, and I will continue to forgive the show a lot because keep in mind my overall impression of the show is still very positive. But at that point, that was the most annoyed I'd ever been with a show when I'm like, come on, guys, I get that you got to get people in the shot. You know, before we got on the air, I talked about my favorite series, which is Band of Brothers. It is the best thing Hollywood has ever done about the Army, and even that series is a victim of camera angles where they want to get the maximum number of actors in screen. They just use wider angles to try to make it look not so egregious. So yeah, that really jerked me out of reality when I'm like, oh my God, they look like they're stacking on a door, but they're in wide open terrain with light vegetation and no cover. You know,
so their tactical interval was one of, and not the greatest of, the Hollywoodized tactical errors in that episode. There were so many, we could spend half an hour going through each one. But that particular one is common throughout TV Army stuff, right? Where they show people, and for the audience, why is that so wrong? The reason that's wrong is we spent 4 years in World War I proving you don't mass infantry when your adversary has a line of fire and a self-loading rifle or an automatic weapon, which Reese has, right? Because you can incur a lot of casualties very, very rapidly, and you spread out a lot more. But that's just one of easily 15 things they get so outrageously wrong that I just kind of went, okay, it's been pretty good so far. I'm just going to chill out. I'm going to ride this one out. Oh my God, he's riding an avalanche. Jesus. I can't ride it out anymore. Make it stop.
Yeah. So Sam, like, sorry to rant on this, but I will say that even the show acknowledges how stupid it is tacitly by showing the sight through Reese's combat optics. And you see like 3 or 4 guys in the tiny little circle that he's looking through. And it's like the implication of that is he could have shot 3 or 4 guys with a rifle. You know, he doesn't even need a grenade, much less mortars or something like that. You know, so again, that's why it gets to guys like us so much, is because we're like, oh Jesus, you know, like 5-meter intervals at least, so one grenade doesn't take out more than 2 or 3 dudes at a time. And if you're, anyway, sorry, I apologize. That is one of the things in the show that the first time, like the second time I caught a lot more stuff watching. The first time I watched that, I was like, oh Jesus, like, come on guys, like you had Navy SEALs on set watching this. How come no one said something? And I get it. I've never made a movie. I've never made a TV series. I don't know what constraints they were operating under. So, you know, let me back that off a little bit by saying I've never had to execute the way they've had to, but it did bug the shit out of me to watch it.
I bet you they shot those scenes in less than a week.
Potentially.
That entire that extended montage smacked of how can we show action and not spend a lot of money making it.
Oh yeah,
and I mean, as a movie maker, how much money you spend is a big deal, right, Sam?
Yeah, and I mean, like TV, you have to move much faster than movies. Movies, you can like spread some stuff out. You can spread action scenes out. TV, you got to deliver those episodes really quick. Especially like one of these. This is just a one-off episode where this is happening. I think like the 5-meter thing, like the closeness, that didn't like occur to me. The thing that occurred to me, and Mike, I think, mentioned it earlier when we were just having our pre-discussion. There's only like a handful of people that are going after this terrorist, and you'd expect them to send like everybody, and like that bothered me. And I mean, the main thing that bothered me for the whole episode is the fact that nothing's going to happen to Reese, and nothing's going to happen to Reese. The whole episode doesn't matter. because you need to have like the chase, because last episode he just blew up San Francisco, so you have to have somebody go after him. But there's episode 7 and 8 coming up, and he's got to keep going. He's got to finish off his list, and so the episode for me doesn't matter. He can survive like going down in like an avalanche. He can survive probably going down a volcano if it came up to it.
Yeah,
that's just
just like Tom Hanks.
Armor. Yes.
That whole chase, the points they had to make in that painfully extended, rife with error, misrepresentations and errors in tactical and operational behaviors, had to do 3 things. Had to show the consequences for blowing shit up in a big city, which would have been multiple hundreds, not a couple dozen bad cops chasing you. It had to show that Reese was being selective, had the chance to bring the mayhem and chose not to. So multiple times, at least 3 or 4 times, he had a cop or another frogman in his sights or under his knife and chose not to kill the guy or guys.
Which is very Frank Castle of him. Yeah,
I was gonna say, yeah.
Even when that might have helped him escape. So maybe they were trying to make him be less of it. They're demonstrating his basic goodness. I don't know, but all that could have been done. And Sam, I think you're 100% right, and I'm reassured that my judgment wasn't flawed when I hear a pro filmmaker say this. It was unnecessary. You could have taken episodes 5 and 6 and made them a single longer episode without having 2 hours of production costs, in my opinion. But in the end, it was all right. I think it's in the bottom 2 of the 8 episodes, in my opinion.
I think I would agree with that. And we've talked about it already, but I will say that, and again, we talked about this in the pregame, but when he sets off the explosives that cause the avalanche, one, it puts him in like comic book hero territory that he survives that, and then it just is blind luck that he doesn't kill the U.S. Marshal who was caught in the blast as well. And I will say, it's a double-edged sword here, right? Because we all, like, Mike and I, we have an interest in military history, so we know there are tons of people who have survived very unlikely things. But Reese combines so many of those things into one person. That's the problem. It's not like there are people who have survived jumping out of a plane and their parachute doesn't deploy, but they are such a statistical anomaly that you're
tiny.
Yeah, you're packing all those statistical anomalies onto one person. Is kind of why it makes it harder to buy. And I will note too that when Mac, the federal marshal, says, I was an Army veteran because even SEALs need heroes too. I'm like, you should be careful with that joke. It's an antique. That one's a little old. I'm sure you were a very good CID agent or whatever you were, but let's keep it in line here.
A comment on the avalanche, because it touches on something that I've never been in an avalanche. I was part of
you're missing out.
Part of a what was initially called a rescue group, but ended up being a recovery group for some people that were caught in a snow avalanche. And so it wasn't even just rock and gravel, it was mostly snow and ice. And what came out at the bottom of the scree field looked like you'd taken a couple of people and put them in a really big, what a ball mill is? Imagine a cement mixer the size of an industrial building, and it's a cylinder, and the inside of the cylinder has spikes that stick into the middle, and you feel full of heavy steel balls and whatever you want to break into pieces. That's a ball mill. It's used for industrial separation of ores. The first thing that we found that I saw was a shockingly intact eyeball all by itself. So if you're in an avalanche, what comes out the bottom is not what those people look like, not even remotely close.
Are you saying the cartoons that I watched growing up lied to me, Mike?
If you figure out how to go beep, beep, zip, bang like the Roadrunner, man, teach me, because I want to know.
So I'm going to go ahead and soften this a little bit because I do listen to the behind the scenes stuff for Terminal List. They tried, right? So apparently, like Chris Pratt and the actress, like they were legit buried under that dirt to get the effect. So again, like we're nitpicking. We're not trying to shit on the effort here, but it is just a little hard to buy when, at no point, like I could totally see, I totally get behind James Reese that it's like, yeah, no, I want to see the people who killed my platoon and my family dead, and I'm willing to ignore all laws and previous commitments I've had to make that happen. But I'm not going to count on myself surviving an avalanche to do it. Yeah. Like it's that issue.
I mean, so maybe another comparison of outrageous things that a special operative survives and are crazy outlandish, but seen just barely within bounds are some of the Mission Impossible stunts from that series of movies, right? Where you're like, man, that's 1 in a million, but if you hit it just right, I can kind of squint and maybe rub my eyes, and okay, maybe that would work out. Maybe. But there is... I can't see anybody being under an avalanche and going down 100 yards of hillside and coming out the bottom with their limbs on.
Yeah,
I think you're getting to a point.
Go ahead, Sam.
No, I think you're getting to a point in just this episode, really, more than any other episodes, where episode 1 through 5 was pretty realistic, and then this is like movie action hero thing. Like it's a different story. It's like a different world. It doesn't really gel together as much. It's like John Wick just appeared into a more realistic movie. And it's like, I love John Wick, but it's John Wick.
John Wick clearly communicates, though, that he's in, while Keanu Reeves' weapons handling is amazing, chef's kiss. He clearly is a comic book superhero.
Yeah.
James Reese is like somewhere in the twilight between I'm someone who could exist and I'm a comic book superhero.
Yeah.
He kind of shifts between like, oh, that's really realistic, and yeah, I don't buy it. He kind of he operates in that twilight between the two worlds.
Yeah, and I'm nitpicking, but that's a real. I hadn't thought of it that way. That's a really good description, Justin. In that 1 minute you're in a Tom Clancy novel, right, where things are kind of realistic and kind of plausible, and there's political intrigue and there's military action, and it seems okay, about right. And the next minute, instead of being in the Clancy novel, you're in the John Wick's environment, where you have to accept the implausible because the action is so compelling.
Yeah.
So you can have a movie that's one thing or the other, but I think mixing them together is hard. Now, all that said, I really enjoyed this series. I will probably rewatch this series, and I've recommended it to a lot of people. When I first went into it, I'm like, oh, man.
I co-opted you a little bit.
Yet another Navy SEAL series. Clearly, we didn't have enough of these, so I'm so glad they made some more. Yeah.
And the reason I even brought you in is because I'm a tiny bit of a Jack Carr fanboy, and I was like, he got more input than an author could expect to normally get. So, and I do think that shows in some ways. In other ways, less so. But yeah, the one thing I did want to bring up that I do like some of the emotional beats in here. I kind of like the scene where he hallucinates and starts talking into the radio. Because frankly, because you remember he starts talking he's having a flashback.
Yeah,
he's talking to his wife, and it turns out he's talking into the radio because he thinks he's talking to the baby monitor.
Is this where the radio he gets out of the park ranger shack is conveniently in the same channel as the FBI HRT tactical team?
Because all radio frequencies are the same in Hollywood, Mike.
It's true. You don't even need comm specialists. Just go down to Radio Shack and get a Space Cadet radio. They all work just like that.
Yeah, because we're not the United States military, and I would assume the federal government aren't obsessive about ComSec. That's not a thing. But I do like the scene nonetheless, where he is talking to his wife, and then he ends up talking to Leon, the FBI agent. about that being a good father and being a good husband is harder than being a good SEAL, or the way I translate being a good soldier. One of my friends put it as, when you serve and you're serious about it, you can be an and, or you can be a but. You can be, when people describe you, oh, that guy's a great officer, but his family's falling apart and he's a douche. That guy's a great officer and he's a great dad. It's a lot harder to be an and than it is to be a but. And that is one thing that I was like, okay, good storytelling. That resonates with Reese, and that haunts him, because by all indications, he did care about his family very much, and he was a conscientious officer. So I was like, okay, on an emotional level, good storytelling. I like it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and it goes back to the whole where he is in his mind with his whole, his diagnosis and all that. And is he always in the present moment? Does he remember where he is at a given time? Which I don't think that, just from a thematic point of view, I don't think they went as far as they could have with that. I guess they didn't in the book too, probably not. But I thought they could have pushed that a little harder. Maybe less FBI chases or whatever chases there were, and more of that. Give me that.
Yeah. So and then he parachutes onto the beach, and we're set up for our next recording, which is episode 7 and 8. Any last thoughts before we begin the outro on this one? Because we went a little longer than I meant to.
Yeah, I mean, we did 2 episodes in one.
Yeah,
so that's pretty good.
Yeah, it's better than our first attempt at this. We went an hour and a half on one episode.
One episode we did that.
Sounds like, would these guys just shut up, man?
I liked episode 5 a lot. I didn't like episode 6. It's my least favorite of the series so far. One thing we didn't touch on, but I'll mention briefly, is Katie, the reporter. She watched the scientist guy, the bald guy, die in front of her, and she ran, and she held her own, which was good to see.
Yeah,
I like that. That was a big moment for her character. So I like that.
Real quick, I want to caveat off of that. Guys who are in the Army will recognize that in joke for what it is. But to caveat off of what Sam said, I appreciate the Katie action scene. I think it's actually fairly well written, in that Katie is smart enough to run, but not smart enough when the hitman is coming to kill her and Mike Tedesco, the bald-headed scientist dude. She's smart enough to run, but not smart enough to try to keep it public, because presumably that hitman wants to kill them, but doesn't want to do it and in front of a dozen witnesses. So I think that was actually fairly realistic. And then I also like from that scene that Katie does shoot that guy, because again, American perspectives on relative power levels, because most of us have played video games or tabletop RPGs or whatever, the bullet doesn't care what level you are or what your class is. If Katie manages to line up the sights and send the round, it doesn't matter that you are an operator, you're down. So I did appreciate that scene, and I agree with you. That's a good scene for Katie. Mike, last thoughts.
I'm aligned with both of you. I won't drag this out. I enjoyed episode 5 because the big bad to that point met his deserved desserts, and I was really cheering for the douche to get douched, and he did. And I really didn't enjoy episode 6, but I played along hoping for a payoff, and I have to say the series does deliver. In our next recording, we'll go into more detail, but the series does deliver. So I'm prepared to forgive a lot of the low points of episode 6, just like there are episodes in other of my favorite series. When I rewatch them, I go, well, I'm going to pay the toll. Not my favorite episode, but adequate to convey what had to be conveyed.
I will watch.
I've produced exactly 0 8-episode TV shows. So
someday.
So far.
You'll put up with encounter at Farpoint to get all good things, so to speak, for my fellow Trekkies out there. So thank you so much for joining me, guys. I'll go with Sam. What is new in the world of Narrow Bridge Films?
Like you said at the beginning, we just got back from Gen Con Film Festival, where we had a nice screening for our horror anthology, Tales from the Narrow Bridge. We didn't win anything, but that was okay. We did come home to a Best Ensemble Award from the New Jersey Film Awards. And right now, we're just waiting to hear back from a bunch more festivals. So in the next couple of weeks, we'll hear more from them. And hopefully we get to go around the world with it.
Awesome. Mike, what's going on in your world today?
Nothing new to report with regards to professional writing, but if anybody gets out to Hawaii and has an afternoon in Honolulu, make your way to the Museum of the Pacific War and get on board USS Missouri. What an extraordinarily well-preserved, well-managed floating battleship where World War II in the Pacific came to a close with the signature of the Japanese in Tokyo Harbor back in 1945. Amazing facility, amazing story, great docents, inexpensive, and you're in Hawaii. So if you're out there, go check it out.
Awesome. I'll go ahead and throw on, if you're East Coast or the South, if you're in New Orleans, hit the World War II Museum for sure. Great experience, lots of great artifacts. And they have a road to Tokyo and road to Berlin exhibit where you trace the path of the war. My late friend Andrew Ullman actually contributed both an Arasaka and a German rifle to this exhibit, so I have a personal stake. And after you've gone to the World War II Museum, if you're in New Orleans, hit up Garden District Books. My friend Chris Tidmore runs that shop, and it's a fantastic facility. You should definitely check it out. That is all the time we have for Lore and Valor. Links to our work will be in the liner notes below, as per normal. If you enjoyed this video or this podcast, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting the bell, leaving us a comment, or leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast venue of choice. We're available on most of them. I'll see you next time. And until then, keep up the fire.
Arrivederci.